We hope you found value in part 1 of this podcast. Thank you for joining us for this second segment.
Hello and welcome to the Communication Solution Podcast with Casey Jackson and John Gilbert. I'm your host, Danielle Cantin. Here at the Institute for Individual and Organizational Change, otherwise known as IFIOC, we love to talk about communication, we love to talk about solutions, and we love to talk about providing measurable results for individuals, organizations, and the communities they serve. Welcome to the communication solution that will change your world. Oh, I love that. I love that. You're a mix of all of it. And it is, I laugh sometimes because there's a couple of phrases I keep reminding myself of. Feels ain't real.
Yeah.
Feelings feels aren't real. And so I have to remind myself of that. And then I also love that. Okay, cool. Danielle, this is awesome. That sucked. And you've got 10 minutes to have like a full-on pity party. Yes. And like putting it in a container of time or something.
I'm so glad I'm not the only person that does that. I literally am like, okay, timer set. Okay, yes. And we're done. Like, let's move forward.
That reminds me of a one-liner at a conference I heard. There was this activity we did, and the facilitator said, we're going to allow you to whine, but we don't allow you to marinate in it. So and I just love that it's like, yeah, you can get it out, and then you're done. Like there's no marination. So I just thought that's that same construct about, yeah, acknowledge it. It's real. Now let's start getting, where do you want to go from here? Kind of a thing. But, and I think this is the thing I want to just wrap into it in terms of, I want to continue to not minimize people's experiences, because the link that I continue to make to the brain science side of it is when there is so much stress and pressure and trauma, neurochemically, it is so hard to get up into the executive functioning. So it's not just like, oh yeah, that happened to you, but get back on your horse. It's not minimizing on that level, the level of mindset it takes. But I also think it's how we know that restorative process, reparative process heals is repetition, 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 repetition. So when every day you're just trying to go, but how do I get my behavior in line with my values? But how do I get my behavior in line with my values? But how do I get my behavior in line with my values? You're developing a new neural network that when stress and trauma comes, you've got a freeway to hop on to get out of, the rubble. And so I, by no stretch, want to minimize stress and trauma and pressure that people experience. But part of this process, and when you think of MI for sustained long-term behavior change, is you've got to develop a different neural network, a different pathway in your brain, that how do I get out of the rubble when rubble happens? And just because that exists doesn't make it simple. It doesn't make it less painful. It doesn't mean there's not legitimate resistance and sustained trauma there. But if you're trying to move forward in your life, if you don't have a free way to get onto, that really makes it extremely complex.
So. That's interesting, because I like that you brought it back to the science of it. I'm always fascinated by what I've learned from you. And, so many of us are in a trauma state in general, yes. The entire world, from a worldwide pandemic still. Yes. Yes. And then we all have all of our individual traumas, and some people measure those, right? Like, well, that wasn't that big of a deal. It could be my pen broke. It could be so many different things. And of course it could be really, really huge things. And so the fact that motivational interviewing addresses that and helps people in a state, brain science state, right, of trauma, yes. to let them choose that other path, but it's repetition that's going to help. Turn the light on.
I think the other thing I need to acknowledge, and then Aly, I know you'll have a ton of thoughts about any of this stuff, is I think the biggest thing I need to acknowledge right now is just how lucky I am with the power and privilege that I have as a white male. Because when I step back and look at the trauma, I continue to have this need inside my brain to continue to acknowledge, to not minimize other people's experiences. And I'm in a place of power and privilege, which has allowed me to stay more in my executive functioning and not from a cultural perspective where I've been abused or marginalized for so many, since birth, that it is much easier for me. So I think it could be trite for me to say it really is that simple. Structurally, it is simple, but actualizing that is extremely complex. And so I need to get out of a privileged white male perspective and also be able to go, yeah, you're right. You have been able to have these things, but you also were ahead of the line gender wise, you're ahead of the line race wise, you're ahead of the line so many other ways that of course it was easier for you to do that. Even though I've experienced all my own trauma in my life, it's just completely different when you put it into cultural context, and we'll look at it from a power and privilege perspective as well. So, which I'm sure, Aly, you have 100 thoughts on.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about, since the training with you, there have been two huge kind of different buckets that I've been thinking about. And one of them I keep going over is like, okay, for the general population, for people who don't have an MI background, how do we get these simple yet very complex things delivered to them without saying, hey, can you go see Casey and John? I can't take all my friends and all the people I know who are experiencing ambivalence and funnel them to someone who does MI. And so I was just thinking about like, how do we deliver these concepts on a broader scale? Is there a way to do that? But I went back to kids. So I'm a mom, I have 2 kids, and I've really attached onto like Dan Siegel's stuff, whole brain child stuff, to try to, like you said, deepen those neural pathways. Like I may not be able to, all the people that come to me in their life with ambivalence, be able to direct them where they need to go and give them the quick rundown of values and all of that stuff. But what I can do as a parent is I can start to help my kids spend less time downstairs and really grow that pathway upstairs, so that when they do have issues that are huge downstairs brain issues, they are like, hey, look at that stairway. I can go upstairs and solve from there. And so I was thinking about the broader population. And like you said, just the amount of stress and trauma across cultures, across our general population over the last 3 years.
Yes.
They've spent so much time downstairs. What's something we could give to people to help them strengthen that executive functioning, that neuroscience piece that's attached to motivational interviewing? Because again, it's very real. It's the science piece of it. It's so real. And there's a way out.
This, Danielle, what she's talking about with upstairs, downstairs with whole brain, is that downstairs is when I'm talking about fight, flight, freeze, and make my little fist, that reptilian brain, the limbic brain, that just brain that's been around for 500 million years, that part of the brain. And then we just got our 3 million year old brain. That's the thinking cortex part of our brain. We just think of the strength of that in stress and trauma. And so that's when Aly's, the way that Siegel simplified it was just upstairs brain, downstairs brain. So that's what Aly's talking about with that.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
I just keep thinking about how do you get, and again, I know you can use motivational interviewing to help people. And if every person that stopped by my door or called me after work, during work, I mean, I would have no gas in my tank, right? Like I couldn't manage it all. But how do we help people see this piece of it and kind of open their eyes? And maybe we can't, right? I wish this would elaborate, and I know it can be used by all other kinds of practitioners. And I think there's certain circles of the health and wellness space who are really, have adopted motivational interviewing, have even brought this focus piece in, stuff like that. But how could we get this across different, different providers for all sorts of different issues, so that people feel like they have more good days than bad. They are able to solve issues on their own. They're using, they're calming that primal functioning with that executive functioning.
Yes.
That's just what I keep going back to, is like, I wish there's a book, a single book that someone could read and just move through, because sometimes I'll have friends that are like, hey, I'm kind of struggling with this. I know that you have followed a nutrition plan for years. How can you help? And I basically just give them like, okay, let me tell you about motivational interviewing. I have 5 minutes, but you got to find some focus. That's your problem. It's like, that's not helpful. That's not accurate empathy, but I don't have time to help you find your focus today. But I just sometimes when people are having ambivalence or issues, I'm like, you should look at focus and motivational interviewing and go find your stuff.
Yeah.
Find someone who can help you find your stuff, So that's what I kind of just keep coming back to.
It's interesting because one of the newest things, since Danielle's been on the team, just even recently, she's really been focused on us doing this thing called Be the Change. So now I'm going to do my first training for people on how do I apply it in my own personal life. And so it's kind of that range of, yeah, the concepts are there, but, and again, at IFOC, we train so many different organizations. It's just mind blowing to me. Just even this last week's trainings, I'm just still kind of teetering from. And because the diversity at which you can help people heal, like you were saying, Aly, it doesn't really matter the profession, because we're dealing with humans in most industries every day. And motivation is a method of communication that helps heal. It helps people move towards who they want to be. It helps resolve their stress and ambivalence so they can get clarity and improve the quality of their life if that's what they choose to do. So there's the thought of how do I orchestrate the conversation? But even this week in training, almost every week in training, people, especially new trainings, people will come up to me and say, hey, how do you use this on yourself? Can you use MI on yourself? Can you MI yourself? And it's like the constructs, yes. I mean, of course, there's going to be all the people in the MI world that say, well, you can't MI yourself. But I live by the tenets of motivational interviewing every single day for myself. And it's drastically improved the quality of my life, and so it's like, yes, we may not be able to put quotes around MIing ourselves, but can we get clear about what our values and goals are? Can we acknowledge where the stuckness is? Can we acknowledge where the resistance is? And then make a concerted effort to go, and with all of my capacity that I have, I'm going to try to focus on the change and the commitment and move steps forward towards who do I want to be? Who do I want to be in my life? And so it's more like, who do I want to be than where do I want to be? And the clear eye about who I want to be helps me understand where do I want to be? Should I stay in this relationship? Is this the career that I really want? Who do I want to be? And I think when you start to focus on that, it starts to untangle our American culture perspective, is that our job defines us, or the number of kids that we have, or our gender defines us, or these things that everything tries to define us. And the people that inspire us the most are the people that are very clear about who they are and stay who they are in spite of all circumstances. Those are the people that tend to inspire us. And I think that's where you can see all these different constructs kind of coalesce into a process. And for me, it's why motivational is so, it really gives me a scaffolding to understand all these different theories and self-helps and therapeutic approaches and how we live life. There's just, for me, it really does start to set up a structure or organizes things in my brain in a very clear and concise way that consistently works. And it's backed by, massive data. And as soon as you look at the ways of introducing MI in different constructs, you've got all these other theories that are out there that actually support each other. I was just telling, talking to somebody yesterday that I used to work with, Jose Guadarrama, who's on faculty at Pepperdine right now. He and I were talking on my drive home yesterday too. And I've really been into this thing about, we need to be so aware of cultural differences, of gender differences, of bias, all these different things. We have to be aware of it. And inside that vessel is a human brain. So it's a human brain. So we need to be aware of the vessel, but the human brain, we know how language impacts the human brain. And language is language. So it's not just mainstream American English. We just know how language impacts the brain. And with neurolinguistics and things, which neurolinguistics is not motivational interviewing. But when you just look at some of these theories, it's like, well, some of these things are just reset in different ways because there's all these inspirations from different people around the world. But when you get back to it, it's just the human brain. And you're talking about communication, and how does communication impact the human brain? How does my own bias impact how I communicate? How does my own bias impact how I listen? Because there's different listening styles. The listening styles is not part of motivational interviewing. But when you're thinking about communication, how could it not be part of communication, like an effective communication method. So the complexity of all these different things still can boil down to, is my behavior in alignment with my values? so it just, that's where it can get so complex and just almost impossible to get your hands around, and then also be able to be consolidated into, when I feel heard and understood, I can breathe a little bit better. When I can breathe a little bit better, I can look at what my dilemma is. When I look at my dilemma, I can get clear what my values are. And when I get clear what my values are, I can ask myself, what would it take for you to take one step in that direction? And that's going from kind of the, meta to the micro. It's just, and that's my obsession with motivation.
Wow. I've got a couple thoughts, Aly, and I'd love to hear your feedback on. I feel like you just covered a lot, Casey. there's a couple things that stood out to me. One is how you are so into learning everything about the brain and all of the other different theories and modalities, which makes sense to me because I've heard so many people that you've trained say that you're different. You're different in terms of training motivational interviewing. And it feels like you pull in some other things that kind of refine it or make it yours in a way. You mentioned you created Focus Mountain, which is huge. Everybody I interact with brings that up. Your teachings around that. But you mentioned too, and there's other things like Simon Sinek's Golden Circle, his why.
Yes.
And I'm like, I'm really familiar with that. And I'm like, what you do is different. And it kind of came out for me in everything you just said in Be the Change. And I'm like, it's
Yes.
a beingness. It's who
Yes.
you are.
Yes.
It's not where you want to be. It's a piece of the equation, but the crux of everything is, who do you want to be at the end of
Yes.
the day? It's just so cool. So I'm super extra excited about the Be the Change now. It's just everything you say, but
it's interesting to you. It's interesting when you say that, Danielle, because what I've tried to do, and John and I have had these conversations multiple times, is one of the hardest things for us in doing curriculum is to try to maintain access to a naive brain, because every time we evolve our curriculum, I actually had this conversation with Aly and her team when I was doing the trainer for them, in terms of the more they learn, the more they want to teach. But what you want to teach is so far beyond what a naive brain that's never experienced MI is. And so there was a period in time where we just had to pump the brakes at IFIOC because we had drifted so far from our original trainings, and people liked the trainings, but they weren't getting some of the foundational things. And then again, going back down to the minutia, when I was talking to Josue about this, because he's teaching counseling theory at Pepperdine and is weaving some MI stuff. And so he and I are having this conversation, and he wanted some tips on this. And I was saying, here's the ways I'm teaching empathy. And he said, Casey, they can't do a reflective statement. I will teach them and tell them how to do a reflective statement, students at Pepperdine, and they will still ask questions. And so it helps me to hear, when we're talking these lofty geek motivation constructs, that it really is hard for people in our culture, especially, and he said it's worse with the social media culture, is they don't understand what empathy is. Like they can reflect how they feel about a situation, but it's so self-centered. And I think it's partly from the COVID. I think it's partly from the immersion in social media, that they can only talk about their own brains. They have a hard time going into what could possibly be going on in somebody else's brain. It's all projection. There's no true accurate empathy. And it was just like, that is fascinating. And it makes sense when you step back for a minute, when kids hadn't been going to school and were going online, like they didn't have that, and everything's on the phone. It's just, wow, I'd never even thought that they don't have the capacity, because their friend didn't wipe out on a bike and they run over to help them up and, and run and get the parent. They don't do that as much anymore. That's just the way we were raised. That's where empathy comes from. But if you're not having human interaction and your friend's not wiping out on a bike, or, it's just, it's somebody breaks up with somebody and there's just revenge. There's not empathy. It's just fascinating.
Are you retooling the way you look at teaching empathy because of this?
what I told him is I said, what really helped me is it helps my brain go back to naive brain. And I said that the difference between what he's teaching and I'm teaching is he's teaching new clinicians that are young college students. And he's just saying the generational difference. And I said, and I'm drifting away from teaching quote unquote reflective listening and open-ended questions because people that have been in the field for 20 years just want to stick their finger down their throat if I start to teach about the ors, because they're like, I learned this in grad school. And they think that's MI and they try to reduce it to that. And then I spend more time trying to untangle that construct when I'd rather teach them about what is high accurate empathy. And if you're doing high accurate empathy, there'll be reflective listening in there. But
what is ORS, Casey?
The open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summary statements. I mean, that's the fact that you've known me this long and don't know those. I'll get kicked out of Mint. Actually, if anybody from Mint is listening to this, they'll kick me out. The fact that you've been in a year,
you're forgetting, Casey, that I listen as a listener. So
I know.
Like, who's listening that doesn't know what ORS is?
So the open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, summary statements are micro skills. They're just skills that every practitioner should have, needs to have, if they're gonna work in human service at all. They're skills that everybody should have, and they are the basics of motivational learning. It's just literally MI 101 is people need to walk away knowing what the OR skills are. But since I teach so many professionals that have been in the field for years, it can feel condescending in some ways, or redundant, or I literally can see their brains shut off and reach for their phone to do something else while I would teach ORs. And I just think that's not a good use of time. But if I launch out of the gate talking high accurate empathy and then start to show them videos and have them try to practice, they realize they're not as skilled at that as they think they are. And as they get more skilled at understanding empathy, then they get better at reflective listening. So it's just different ways of training, just different ways of teaching the same constructs. And it's all motivational interviewing from that lens. So,
and I think one of the things, and I know we talked with you about this, Casey, that we're running into with this accurate empathy piece too, and just, the last however many years, is people are so concerned that, if somebody's talking about a topic or an issue that maybe they don't align with, or in society is seen as, something they shouldn't align with. If I give a reflection, they're going to think I'm in agreement with them. And we go with this a lot. And so then to like kind of tie to what we were talking about earlier, but if you have really strong values and a really strong identity, then you know where you are.
yes.
Right. So it's, there have been times where I think of reflections I've given and someone's like, oh, you totally get it. Right. And it's like, well, actually it has nothing to do with me. I don't agree with you. I don't totally get it. But I'm so clear on my identity and my values in that it doesn't matter. Like I don't lose sleep over it. I don't sit in my car and go, God, I hope they don't think that I agree with them. I don't think 1 minute about it because I know where I'm at and I know who I am. And so that's something that keeps coming up with our newer, greener people we train, is this idea of like, okay, accurate empathy is cool and all, and I don't want those words coming out of my mouth because they may think, so again, emotionally driven, they may think I'm A, B, C, and D, or that I agree with this. And so that's been a really interesting thing to navigate training, newer people as well, is people are very, very cautious about what's coming out of their mouth and the perception of the person across from them.
Which is interesting because I can go empathetic with that. And what I think of is, why, if you're getting to a better outcome, why do you care if they think you agree with them or don't agree with them? Because that, oh, they agree with me is a blip on the radar of an MI potential conversation. And what it is it's so focused on the individual, they're not really focused on you. So why are you focusing on you? Because it really is. So if in that moment Danielle thinks I agree with her and she continues to talk about her life, and for that split second she thinks, oh, we're on the same page, and she keeps talking about her life and I stay focused on motivation and keep her brain focused and help her get her behavior in line with her values, where was that blip on the radar? What impact did that really have on? Do you think she's going to go home and go, oh, Casey agrees with me. Casey agrees with me. She doesn't care.
No, she's not going to think about you at all. She's going to think
not
about
going to think about me at
herself.
all because she has her own life, and people tend to be more self-centered. So why we're egocentric enough to think, oh my gosh, if they think I agree with them, that's going to over influence their life. And I think, well, then you're not an equipoise and you're too involved in their life. So it is fascinating. But again, I do have that empathy for more of a naive brain, that it's just like when your brain has not experienced it consistently, it is hard to make it second nature. And when you do it consistently, it becomes second nature. You think, boy, that was a lot of wasted energy, which goes back to the original thing we talked about at the start of the podcast of it is amazing how much time we put into things that aren't going to yield a positive outcome. It's putting your foot in the right place, in the right direction will get you one step closer. And even if you are climbing up the mountain and you take a step, it doesn't mean you don't take a step forward towards the top of the mountain and your foot ends up in some brambles or you twist your ankle. I mean, just because you're moving forward does not mean that there's not stuff that happens. So it's that same thing, that it's not this, once you're there, it's this perfect path. You're still walking up the mountain, but you can get, trip and fall and break your leg and, and fall forward and break your leg. Life still happens. It doesn't make it perfect because you operate from this mindset.
And you're still walking.
And you're still
the piece I come back to and you're still moving, like forward. You're doing actionable things moving forward instead of staying stuck in this weird momentum in your brain.
Love it. Aly, thanks so much this is what I love about what I do. I never know what's going to go. My brain is working 1,000,000 miles an hour, which is always fascinating when I do that on a Friday, that it's like, I wish this was a Monday because I'm so lit up right now.
Thanks for having me. It's great. I could talk absolutely. For hours. Well, you know that, but
awesome. Danielle, any thoughts as we're wrapping up?
No, I want to thank you both so much. It's so great to listen to the deeper conversations, and then also both of your abilities to kind of come back and go back to the starting point for someone new like me, and for our listeners too. So all of the listeners out there, thank you so much for joining us. Aly Gibson, you are awesome. Thank you. Casey, as always. And tune in. You guys share your thoughts with us. You can email Casey@ifioc.com. Let us know what you're thinking, any ideas for topics and guests, and keep tuning in. Thank you so much. We'll see you guys next time.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Communication Solution Podcast with Casey Jackson and John Gilbert. As always, this podcast is about empowering you on your journey to change the world. So if you have questions, suggestions, or ideas, send them our way at Casey@ifioc.com. That's CASEY@ifioc.com. For more information or to schedule a training, visit ifioc.com. Until our next Communication Solution Podcast, keep changing the world.